Today, we're going to create your first database to allow your app to be able to send and receive your data.
Let's see how to connect Voltapp to a database, in our case, Airtable. Airtable is a database, a kind of memory of your app, very simple to understand. To do this, we need to use the Airtable node in the category Node Integrations. At the time of this video, there are also connectors to Google Firebase and its open source alternative Supabase. Several other connectors will be coming soon. The Airtable node is to be dragged into the tree to allow all of its children to use its actions. This will be quite high in general. This is useful for all purposes: creating contact form data, retrieving blog articles. Let's take a look at an example. Let's place our section as a child of the Airtable block. We notice that the block immediately asks for an API key. To get it, you have to go to the Airtable website. It is on this site that we can go to a test database. We can see that it is visually linked as a table with sheets called tables, like Excel. Let's rename the table Articles. We see different fields, called fields, have different types. Let's keep name for the name of the article, rename the second one to content of the article. Let's delete the third field to keep it simple. Let's fill the database by putting for the first line in the title, my article, in content, the description of the article, then in the second line, in title, second article, in content description. To retrieve the API key, you have to click on your profile, then on account. You can copy the API key in pink, then paste it in the Airtable node. A database field appears to us to ask us which database we want to connect to. Let's choose the test database. Then the table is asked. Let's choose articles. Airtable is now connected. We could use the list system that we can retrieve via the graph of the Airtable node by indicating the following logic. As soon as it appears, we want to retrieve lines. The app node, for example, is not a child of Airtable, so Airtable actions are not available there. Let's go back to the Airtable graph and use retrieve rows. We can see that we can fill rows by the Airtable formulas available on the Airtable website to choose, for example, only the rows with certain values of certain types. The sorting allows to reorder the result of the query. The Voltapp templates working on the Airtable show this in more detail. The output points are success a boolean to determine if a query is succeeded or not, error text to give the error detail if there is one, and a list for the list of rows. I recommend connecting success to the test entry point of a condition block. And if the query failed, connect to the text entry point of a debug block the error detail, which will only be visible in test mode in the log history of the debug menu. Let's connect the recover rows flow to condition. We can see that the rows output point is already a list type. We can now use a very useful feature of Voltapp, which allows, by stretching this point, to promote the list to a variable, called by default records, which avoids creating the variable manually. Let's link the condition flow to the definition of the variable records. We can check in the variables menu that the records variable contains the object type with the name and content fields from the database. Let's rename the variable records. Let's assign it to the list node. In the text node of the item node, I can then assign the item.name field to the text value. By clicking on preview, I can see the titles of the items displayed. Let's make our example prettier by placing our list in a section that will take up 100% of the screen, orient the distribution from the top, and create an internal margin. Let's go back to the list node and in the items variable, create default values for the title and content fields with the names 1 in content and 2 in content. This allows us to test the design easily. We can customize the first text displaying the title, add a second text displaying the content. If we want to customize the first text as title, we can add a second text displaying the content. If I launch the preview, we can see that the data is loaded from Airtable. But we see my default values while waiting for the data to load. It would be better to have a loading wheel, a spinner. For this, I create a condition node above the section, which I place in the false node. For the true node, I add a spinner and a text indicating that the loading is in progress. I turn the condition value into a variable, which I rename loading in progress. This allows me to go into the graph of the Airtable node and define before the request that loading in progress is false and true after. By running the preview, we see that the spinner is indeed playing while we wait for the request. Let's look at how to create a row to add the entries of a contact form, for example. Let's delete all of the child nodes of an Airtable to start a new design. Let's add a section with 2 short input text boxes, input, and 1 long text box, zone. Let's rename the email, subject, and message. In my Airtable database, I can create a new messages table with a subject, email, and message as fields. I can delete my empty example rows. Back in the Airtable node, I have to change my table. It does not appear because the connection must be updated. Sometimes the connection can have a bug. Feel free to copy your API key, delete your Airtable node, and recreate it by pasting your key. Then check that your new table appears. Don't hesitate to rename your Airtable node according to the table you are using to avoid getting lost. Let's set the section to 100% and add a button to send message. Let's create a graph to code the logic. If I click, I choose an Airtable action. We have seen recover rows. You can retrieve a line, which is the same thing, but to retrieve a specific line according to a unique line identifier. Recovering rows by page allows, if you have a lot of rows, to recover them by packets of 20, 50, etc. as you go along. There are also delete, update, and create a line, which we'll use. You can see that I can directly enter the values of the new line, but messages appears as an image. It's really important in Airtable to specify the data type of each field. So let's go back to Airtable to change the type of messages from attachments to text. Let's take the opportunity to change the email type from long text to email. If we return to Voltapp and we do not refresh the database after a change of structure, the synchronization will not be done. It is therefore necessary to click again on Update in the Airtable node. Let's go back to the graph of the Send button node to see that the Create a Line block has 3 text fields, which is exactly what we want. And if I enter default values, then running the preview and clicking Send will add them to the database. Now we have to make these elements dynamic from the form. The 3 nodes that make up the form already have graphs, with change events that indicate that as soon as there is a change in the input text box, it updates a value variable. So we can go to the variable menu, rename the value variable to email value, and drag it into the section, the parent node, so that it is available in all of its children. Let's do the same thing with the values variable that we transform into subject value and message value. Once in the button graph, I can't directly assign the fields of a row to variables because a row in a database is an object. By dragging the row entry point, I can select the expression structure object block, which breaks the row into 3 values, on each of which I can assign my value variables. By running the preview, filling in the fields, and clicking on Send, then going to Airtable, it is clear to see that the database has been filled in. Having filled the fields in incorrectly, I'd better give the user a little more indication of which text field corresponds to which expected data. To do this, I can fill in the hint attribute, placeholder, with email and subject. I may also want to allow the user to send with the same email several subjects and messages. For that, I have to go into the button graph and indicate that after the creation of a line, I set to empty the value of the message and the subject. Another feasible improvement for a form to allow sending only if all of the fields are filled. For this, you can, for example, go to the disabled attribute of the button and transform it into a formula. I can write, for example, the formula for which disabled will be true. The list of formulas is available in the documentation. Here it will be OR, between the parentheses, email value is equal to between quotation marks, nothing, comma, subject value is equal to between quotations, nothing, comma, message value is equal to between quotation marks nothing, close parentheses. I run the preview and I see that the button is disabled, but if I fill in the 3 fields, it reactivates. We could also display a text in case of error and another one in case of success. Let's create 2 variables on section. Let's customize the color of these 2 texts, red and green. Let's connect their variables. Then, let's go to the graph of the Send button. Then, let's add a condition whose entry point is linked to its success. Then, on True, create the block-defined success message with the text to be displayed. Message sent, and on False, create the block-define error message, whose entry point is linked to the error exit point of the block create align. Finally, don't forget to reset the error and success messages. To do this, you need to create the logic on the graph of the section node. As soon as it appears, set error message to empty and set success message to empty. The preview shows the success message and the data is recorded in the database. We still need to see how to update a data. We can't do it as is because if we try to add this Airtable action in the section node, we see that the block asks me for an ID, a precise line identifier. To know the ID, we'd have to go back into Airtable and add an ID field with a formula type by typing the formula record ID. The formula is applied and all of the IDs of the line appear. Let's say I want to edit the second row, so I have to copy its record ID, which I will add in the update row block. In the new fields of the row, let's put random values. To see concrete examples of Airtable use, I invite you to look at Voltapp templates like Airtable List or Tasks. And that's all for this part about Airtable.
Thanks for watching this tutorial. We're so excited for you to take these new skills and go out and use them to create your own apps.